Was Facebook ever willing to share user data with the Chinese Communist Party?
Yes, Senator.
In fact, they had a plan for that, didn't they? Here's some more documents, internal documents. Update, I spoke with the China team yesterday. They flagged a potential complication arising from our negotiations with the Chinese government. I emphasize this is a Facebook document now. These are Facebook executives. In exchange for the ability to do operations in China, Facebook will agree to grant the Chinese government access to Chinese user data. Facebook is talking about making Chinese user data available to the Chinese government because they're going to store that data in China. Is that correct?
Correct.
But when you store that data in China, Americans who exchange messages or other information with Chinese Facebook users, that would mean the Chinese government could get access to the American data as well. Is that correct?
Through the POP servers, potentially, yes.
And Facebook was willing to take that risk?
Yes, there was a lot of discussion about this, and ultimately, yes.
Let me ask you this. What about user data, Ms. Wynn-Williams? Facebook has said publicly many times we would never compromise user data. It's a red line in the sand. We'd never do that. Never, never, never. Was Facebook ever willing to share user data with the Chinese Communist Party?
Yes, Senator.
In fact, they had a plan for that, didn't they? Here's some more documents, internal documents. Update, I spoke with the China team yesterday. They flagged a potential complication arising from our negotiations with the Chinese government. I emphasize this is a Facebook document now. These are Facebook executives. In exchange for the ability to do operations in China, Facebook will agree to grant the Chinese government access to Chinese user data. There it is in black and white. Facebook will agree to grant the Chinese government access to Chinese user data, including Hong Kongese user data. And then they talk about they're going to have to get their Hong Kong citizens to re-agree to terms of service so they can slide this right by them. This is extraordinary. Can I just ask you, Ms. Wynn-Williams, was Americans' user data ever compromised? Or they ever planned to compromise American user data in any way? Do you know?
One of the challenges with the servicing a market as big as China was the internet infrastructure that would underpin that. So I mentioned the cable that they joined between the US and China, and that would be very helpful. But in servicing this market, but it would still mean that the service would be slow. So they contemplated using POP servers, and POP servers as a technical data server that brings the data closer to the end user. The challenge with POP servers is that you can't segregate data. It would have American data, it would have Chinese user data, and it would be on Chinese soil.
So I want to just be clear about this. Here in this document, Facebook is talking about making Chinese user data available to the Chinese government because they're going to store that data in China. Is that correct?
Correct.
But when you store that data in China, Americans who exchange messages or other information with Chinese Facebook users, that would mean the Chinese government could get access to the American data as well. Is that correct?
Through the POP servers, potentially, yes.
And Facebook was willing to take that risk?
Yes, there was a lot of discussion about this, and ultimately, yes.
I mean, this is extraordinary. This is exactly contrary to what Facebook has represented for years. Here, they're willing to build data centers, store data in China. They are willing explicitly to give the Chinese government access to it. And if that means that American user data is also compromised, they're willing to do that too. All for profits in China. There was virtually nothing they weren't willing to do. Ms. Wynn-Williams, let me ask you a little bit more about the censorship tools that you've been asked about today, you've testified about, that were actually deployed in Hong Kong and Taiwan. And let's just, if we can, let's just look again at the privacy team email. Not that one. That one. Yeah, so this is, and just so members of the press understand, the committee's in possession of this document. We have blacked out, as you can see, we've blacked out the names of individuals here, but in the documents, we have those names. Of course, we'll follow all appropriate legal procedures, but just so the press understands, The committee is committed to doing a full investigation. We do understand and know who the people are on this chain. We can see who they are, and we can see the full course of the discussion. But I just want to emphasize something here. The update is they spoke with the China team. They flagged a potential course of potential complication of course of negotiations with the Chinese government. Let's just stop there for a second. Someone pointed out to you that Mark Zuckerberg testified under oath that he didn't know what the Chinese government's terms would be to operate Facebook in China because they were banned, quote unquote, in China. So he just had no idea. He was saying this as late as 2017, 2018. He just had no idea what the terms would be. That's just categorically false, isn't it?
Absolutely, Senator.
And this email shows that it is false, correct?
Correct.
In fact, what this email shows is Facebook is in very regularly close contact with members of the Chinese government, down to specifying how they want the censorship tools to work. They're giving feedback on it, back and forth and back and forth. And here they've agreed on a set of censorship tools to deploy in Hong Kong, down to the fact that they say we're going to have to actually re-TOS. Does that mean terms of service?
Correct.
So in other words, they're going to have to push out to Hong Kong users a new click thing for them to click on, which they won't, of course, really understand or know because it's almost impossible to decipher. But in fact, what they're doing is it's allowing Facebook to stand up new censorship tools on behalf of the Chinese government. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, here's another interesting point. Back in 2012, the FTC here in this country, the FTC entered a consent decree with Facebook about privacy. Do you remember, Ms. Wynn-Williams, this would have been early on in your time at the company, but do you remember roughly any of the terms of that FTC consent decree? Because they are relevant here.
I do, Senator. They were intended to prevent Meta from deceiving people about the extent to which they collect and share their data.
Yes, so the part of the order is, and let me just quote, Facebook shall, quote, shall not misrepresent in any manner, expressly or by implication, the extent to which it maintains the privacy or security of covered information, end quote, which is user data. Now, Facebook is under a consent decree with the FTC on this basis, and yet they are deliberately misrepresenting across the world the security of user data. They are negotiating with the Chinese government to turn over user data, grant the Chinese government access to Chinese user data, including the Hong Kongese, including Taiwan, and yet they're representing to American government officials, no, we don't do that. We don't do that. In fact, they testified under oath. We don't make user data available. All of that was just lies. Is that fair to say, Ms. Wynn-Williams?
Senator, many decisions have been made, and they were all premised on the basis that Meta would hand over Chinese user data to the Chinese Communist Party.
So in addition to lying to Congress on what seems like a fairly regular basis, lying about suppressing dissidents, lying about setting up censorship tools, they've also arguably violated FTC consent decrees. And we have the documentation. This isn't just Ms. Wynn-Williams' opinion. This isn't just her recollection. We have the documentation with the Facebook employees, who I might add are high-level, executive-level employees, who are planning this and doing this. It's quite extraordinary. This was a pattern of operations at Facebook over and over and over.